Hey everybody, good afternoon. It is Wednesday, April 1st, 2020, April Fool's Day. But it is no joke who we're going to be joined by in just 2 minutes. We're going to be talking with congressional candidate Claudia Tenney, running in New York's 22nd congressional district. She's the former congresswoman of that district. She lost in 2018 to our last guest here on the podcast, who is now serving, Representative Anthony Brindisi. So she's hoping for a rematch, but there is a Republican primary against our guest before that, George Phillips. The Republican primary is on June the 25th. At least that's when it's scheduled for, but that's one of the things we're going to be asking Claudia about today, is because the coronavirus is really hijacking everything that's going on in our daily lives. As you know, the president has extended his coronavirus guidelines, social distancing guidelines to the American people for the next 30 days. They were in place for 15 days before that. So that's a total of 45 days now. Our country is going to be virtually paralyzed. And so we're going to be talking to her about what's been going on the domestic front here at home, as well as what it means for folks abroad, as we are seeing a lot of concern about China's influence over the United States. We're going to talk to her about that. She has some very strong opinions on that. We're going to talk to her about it. We're also going to talk about how the president has been using this time as well. He still has his sanctions on Iran. There's some concerns now that he will use the coronavirus as a distraction to try and declare war on Iran. We're going to be talking to her about what she thinks the diplomatic relations should be like right now with Iran, whether or not there should be sanctions on the country because they have been hit very, very hard by the coronavirus. So we're going to talk to her about all of those concerns and much more. And we're going to try and talk to her a little bit about the race as well, about how she feels moving into this Republican primary and into the general election again with Anthony Brindisi if she was the Republican nominee. So without further ado, I guess here we go. We're going to place the call. Hopefully it won't take us too long here. Good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you? We're live on Twitter right now, and if you want to just give yourself a little introduction, let the people know who you are.
Hang on, let me turn this up.
Alrighty.
All right, well, good afternoon. I noticed you tagged this as April 1st.
Oh, yes. No joke at all, though. No joke at all, Congresswoman, that's for sure. This interview is going to be no joke, I assure you.
Yeah, so just wanted to say hello to everybody out there who's, I'm certain, observing social distancing and trying to curtail their outdoor activities and at home or walking the dog or doing whatever to stay safe during this difficult time that we're experiencing in our region, our country, our world. It's hopefully going to end soon, but for now, I guess we are trying to just be as cautious as we can be and pray for our first responders, our healthcare workers, doctors, everyone that's on the front lines, our small businesses, those that are struggling, our workers who are out of work. I think it's a really, really tough time. But I'm happy to join you and talk a little bit about how we're coping with this issue, as well as also a small business owner.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on a lot of the topics we're going to talk about here, but first I want to ask you on a personal note, how's your own personal social distancing going so far?
Well, it's fine. I mean, I'm not really going anywhere.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've got a dog, and I take my dog for a walk. I don't go near any of my neighbors and say hi from a distance. And I've been mostly either in my house. I've gone out and gotten some gas. I've picked up the mail for the office. I've worked a lot on my computer and done that type of thing. There's not really a whole lot you can do. Obviously, our grassroots campaigning is something that's had to come to a halt. It's something that I really enjoy doing, whether it's going door to door, holding events, being able to meet people is not happening at the moment. So we actually started and launched today a little questions with Claudia segment. And so we're encouraging people to send questions to info@claudiaforcongress.com if they have questions about, whether it's the coronavirus, what's going on topically on that, or any other issue that's going on with the federal government in terms of what bills are passed or not being passed. Not much activity is happening at the moment.
Yeah.
And there is a big issue that's happening today, and that's the New York State budget, and that's going to impact all of us in New York State. And so I've been trying to comb through some of the issues I can get as much as I can online about that. Even though I'm no longer in the state assembly, all of what's going on in New York is going to impact us throughout the state. Sure. So as a business owner, I'm concerned about the looming fiscal crisis that we're seeing in New York with a $6 billion deficit before the coronavirus crisis, and now facing as much as a $15 billion crisis in budget holes. So we'll be interested to see how we're going to be tackling that on the state side, because it's going to impact all of us.
Absolutely. And speaking a little bit more about the campaign, we're looking at, the president extended these guidelines till April 30th. There's concerns that hopefully it will go away by the summer. The social mitigation and stuff will start to clear things up by May and June. Are you concerned that it will affect the Republican primary at all, or the general election in November? And do you think we should start preparing for a mail ballot system?
I'm not concerned yet about the primary and how we're going to be voting. Hopefully we'll have a good handle on this thing. If not, we're going to see an economic collapse if we don't have a handle on it by then. We're already seeing signs that the so-called curve is going to be peaking and coming downward. The so-called arc of the growth in the virus. Sadly, we've seen some people that have succumbed to the virus in the region, unfortunately. So we have to continue on this path, but I don't think it's hopefully going to impact the primary. Certainly, I don't think, hopefully, it will not impact the general election. I'm not opposed to novel ways of voting, but I want to be sure that however we do vote in elections, that we are secured and their ID is required, that we know that the person who's voting intends to be the person who's voting. I think that this is a huge area for problems if we don't have a way to verify voters, and that the actual voter who says he or she is voting is that person. We know we have these problems with this so-called ballot harvesting and vote harvesting that's gone on in California and in New York. So I want to be sure that we do whatever we do, we make sure that we've taken that into consideration.
Absolutely. I want to talk about some stuff that has to do with foreign policy. I want to begin by asking you about your comments related to the coronavirus and China. You said just this morning, actually, that you want China to be, the Chinese government to be held accountable for the virus. And I've read your articles on the matter, and I understand your arguments about American over-reliance on Chinese products. So I appreciate that aspect of your beliefs, but I also want to address, there have been multiple reports of violence and harassment against Chinese Americans and Asian Americans who've been perceived to be Chinese in response to the virus. Would you like to clarify your comments on the Chinese in light of these kind of racist attacks against Americans in response to the crisis?
Well, first of all, it's totally unacceptable that anyone would be attacking someone based on race, gender, class, any of those issues. And so we completely condemned anything that would happen in that way. My discussion is mostly about China and the Chinese Communist Party, which actually rules and dominates, often in a brutal way, showing a lack of regard for its own citizens, and people who have escaped China, who have come to this country seeking freedom and the ability to live under our system. Those people are American citizens or permanent residents or whatever their status would be, of course, deserve our protections and our respect. And anyone that's carrying out that kind of discussion is really just not, I mean, that's just not acceptable behavior on any level. I haven't seen the reports that you're talking about. I've seen some issues on Twitter, I haven't seen other newspapers or media reporting in a broad way about it, but it should, of course, be condemned. But let's not try to make this sound like we're not being honest. This is the Communist Party,
no, absolutely.
The Chinese Communist Party, known for murdering its own citizens, tormenting people who believe in religion, whether they're Muslims or Christians or Jews or anyone across any of their region. I've also had an opportunity to travel to some of those countries. Yeah. That have been bullied by China, whether it's Taiwan. We recently saw a WHO former employee now somewhat bullying the people in Taiwan who are desperately trying to maintain, a free society without the influence of the Communist Party. I've been to the Tibetan government in exile and met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama about the cruelty and the violence against the Tibetan people by Chinese as aggressors. We've seen the protests in Hong Kong and the Chinese cracking down on Hong Kong residents who are seeking freedom and to get out from under the Chinese Communist Party. These are people who are all technically from China or the Pacific Rim area, which have been bullied by China, and we need to be cognizant of that. And it does concern me that some in our media seem to be implying that they're going to be accusing, for example, the American military of bringing the virus here, as the Chinese Communist Party tried to plant in the minds of and was carried by some media actually in the United States. These are things that we have to take seriously. And of course, everyone condemns racism and targeting citizens just by their race. I mean, that's just totally unacceptable.
We're going to talk about the public health system itself, the hospitals, the supplies, the medical professionals. We're seeing issues with PPE, with ventilators. What concerns do you think that there is that we weren't 100% prepared for this moving into it?
Well, I have a concern that, I don't know how many years ago, Governor Cuomo had the opportunity to invest in ventilators and chose not to. Instead, we invested billions of dollars in these economic development schemes, which really took taxpayer money and dumped them into private corporations because under New York State law, you can't actually give money directly to private corporations. We've used, whether it's the healthcare system or we've gone through our education system to funnel money into these groups, whether it was the Startup New York program, the Buffalo Billion, and numerous other controversial programs, which actually landed a number of people in jail for their participation in these schemes, instead of investing properly in mundane things like buying ventilators, making sure we had PPE equipment, make sure we were manufacturing these things here in New York State or here in our country and having those available in the event of a pandemic. You know, we spent a lot of money wasted on so-called corporatism or giving money out on these schemes that didn't yield a whole lot of revenue or jobs in the end for American citizens and New Yorkers.
Absolutely. Is there any concern about the Trump administration? There were some cuts made to the National Security Council, specifically their Pandemic Prevention Office. Is there any concern about the Trump administration and the federal government's ability to stock up on those PPE? I know some of the state government officials were also cutting back on those supplies, but do you think the Trump administration also had a role to play in the shortage that we're seeing?
I don't think so. I also don't think it's the role of the federal government to be doing that. Although I think Trump administration has gone above and beyond basically every demand that Andrew Cuomo has had for his own failure to prepare New York. The president has brought in the comfort ship. He's found the ventilators. He's gathered together, independent people and businesses from across the country to, in many cases, donate the work they're doing. I mean, a lot of criticism of Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, who is, repurposed his own plant to make 50,000 masks a day, those N95 masks, which, by the way, are $19 on Amazon right now. This is the kind of thing that I think Trump has done to really to get around that. I've heard this whole discussion about the Trump so-called rearranging the pandemic office was actually not exactly what it was. And I haven't had time to read into the real detail, but it looks to me like that isn't entirely true what was going on there. I think there was some maneuvering and moving of people around. So I don't feel like I'm an expert enough on the real makings of that, but sure. I'm very suspect about the facts therein.
Right.
Although I will say I think that the president has really stepped up to the plate. The fact that he came in early and closed off people coming in from China as early as January 31st, among other things. So I think the president, has definitely done a good job in trying to stem the tide. I don't think anyone really expected what we've seen here. I think if you've listened to Dr. Birx or Dr. Fauci, a lot of it is, you can only rely on some modeling. It turns out the Chinese were lying to us again, the Chinese Communist Party, big surprise. And so some of our modeling wasn't accurate. I have friends who actually live in Italy. All of them, the entire family, all were positive for the coronavirus. All have suffered from it, except for their 3-year-old daughter, thankfully. And so they've given me a lot of feedback, disappointment with the Italian government, disappointment with the way the Chinese have handled it and the way that the virus was spread in Italy from a number of Chinese people coming into the region there. So that's a story for a whole other discussion. But a lot here, I think, is, unfortunately, I don't think anybody's been perfect in the scenario. But I sure think that, everyone's trying to step up to the plate, whether it's the private sector and those in government, the president especially.
Absolutely. So I want to say as well, we saw the CARES Act was passed to provide a stimulus package to American families and small businesses. You've criticized some aspects of the bill as kind of left-wing pork. What were your concerns with that last stimulus bill, and what are you looking for as they kind of move into this fourth wave of stimulus packages?
Right. Well, the original bill was negotiated in the Senate, the original CARES Act, and it was torpedoed by Nancy Pelosi flying into town. And actually, Senator Schumer was supportive of it originally. And then the House went in and they decided to add all kinds of money. Most of it was taken out. They wanted to put in some very dangerous provisions regarding election law, which we alluded to earlier, which would have had same-day voting, which would have eliminated mandatory ID across the nation in terms of voting, would have basically kind of put into law in a dire crisis. This is just unacceptable to put into law H.R. 1, which is the Democrats' basic, take over the election and how to win by cheating an election law provision. If you want to read H.R. 1, it's just a debacle to our system of government on what they're trying to put through. There were a number of provisions from the Green New Deal that were added in that had to deal with airplane emissions and more burdensome regulations on government that were not necessary, things that were policy decisions that should be discussed in something other than an emergency bill to deal with the, pending pandemic that we're all experiencing. She did end up getting some of the pork she wanted in. Interestingly enough, a lot of controversy over the $25 billion to the Kennedy Center. And lo and behold, after that money comes in, they turned off and laid off their entire symphony and orchestra. And, you just have to wonder what's going on there. But I think all those things should be taken out. I don't like omnibus bills. I didn't like them when I was in the state assembly.
Would you have voted for it if you were in the House right now? Would you have voted for the bill that ended up on the president's desk?
The last bill that had to go in under duress, we had to vote for it. In a perfect world where I could go in and put individual measures in place where you could vote on them one at a time, I would have been able to remove the Kennedy Center funding. All those things should be discussed somewhere else, not in a coronavirus pandemic bill in a crisis.
Right. So I do want to turn to the campaign if I could. You've received many endorsements from both local and national Republican figures, most notably the president. What do you feel those endorsements say about your effectiveness as a representative for this district?
I think they say a lot. I think that the president coming in early in a primary is highly unusual. I think Kevin McCarthy, our minority leader, Steve Scalise, the House whip, personal hero of mine, number of members of Congress from Elise Stefanik, Lee Zeldin, Peter King, Devin Nunes, people from all sectors, whether it's Tammy Bruce, the commentator, people from all areas have endorsed our campaign. They know the good work we did in Congress. They know how hard we worked for those 2 years and that one term, that we had unprecedented and really historic gains that we brought, whether it's the Air Force Research Lab, opioid funding that we brought to our communities. As I said, I won a public health care award, brought in and co-sponsored the VA Mission Act, which is a really important bill to help our 50,000 plus veterans around the community. We did a lot. The tax cuts obviously were huge for our communities. I received the support of Susan B. Anthony List, a pro-life women's group, a number of conservative organizations, including the State Conservative Party, the county committees from around the region, which was humbling for me. It was nice to get the United County Republican Committee's endorsement almost unanimously. That was important to me. Just a number of people. We know we need to win this seat. We know we need to put, some common sense back in Congress. We need to, stop this nonsense that we're getting with Nancy Pelosi and impeachment that is, consumed the Congress. Let's get on and do the business of being responsible. As the most important legislature in the world, we need to act like it. We need to get to understand our role. Our role is to protect our own citizens, to secure our borders, but also to make sure that we're good citizens across the world in helping people that are our allies and numbers across this whole earth. I mean, it's just so frustrating to watch the time that's wasted. On just removing the president, for example, from office. Or I think the American people get to see, because I think it's quite amazing that the president has these long press conferences and just happens to be on the coronavirus issue from last night, for example, to see just the pettiness of the media and for them to not understand their role in being the fourth estate and to find information and to be a check on government, not to be a gotcha or what they're doing. I mean, just watching Jim Acosta from CNN, is frustrating at times. And I owned a family newspaper. I mean, we had a weekly newspaper with over 100,000 circulation in this region.
Oh, I know you're a good interviewer, Congresswoman. I know. Oh, don't worry. I was on the show back in September. You asked some good questions.
Well, it's not just the interviewing, but it's the role of the media.
Yep.
I mean, one of the reasons I think people would be surprised at why, I struggle sometimes with our local Republican Party is because when I ran our newspaper, my mission, which I learned from my grandfather and my mother and my grandmother, who were the publishers before me, was to really provide information to the public. We have a special role in media, and our role is to provide information to the public, to provide the facts, to as much as possible to not interject, political bias,
absolutely,
or to state that. And I did that with our newspaper, and I went after some giants in the Republican Party. I also went after some people in the Democratic Party and people that weren't doing their job in government. And so I might have been unpopular on the Republican side, and people said, geez, why weren't you helping us? You're a Republican. I'm like, my job is not to help the Republicans. My job is to be the fourth estate, to be a watchdog for the public, to get the truth to them, not to filter it through Republican or Democratic principles. And I think that's what's gone wrong with the press. And I think, in some ways the president frustrates me, but in some ways, he gets it right on that. So I think that, we need to focus on that. I think that people in public want the truth, and I think it's frustrating. Just as watching the press conference, I mean, we're all sitting bunkered in our homes, and I want to hear what the president's team has to say. I know they have access to more than we do. Now that I'm not in Congress, I don't have as much access to the information. I want to know what the facts are. I don't want to hear about the president said 3 weeks ago something and now you're contradicting it, and what about this, and that. I just want to know what the facts are. I want to know that our public officials are held accountable, and they're trying to do what's right. And the press should be asking tough questions, but sometimes it looks like they're really not interested in getting to the truth. They're just looking for ways to attack or interrupt or trip up the president, as opposed to trying to save and help American lives, which appears to be what they're trying to do.
Sure, and I agree. Those press conferences can turn into quite a spectacle, but I do like hearing from the president's team. Maybe not so much from the president, but that's a topic for a different time. Do you think that for the Republican primary, do you think your opponent has challenged you to a debate? Do you think that you will debate George Phillips before the primary election?
We'll see. I mean, I haven't heard much from George Phillips lately. I think that we probably will do something.
Maybe on elected news?
I don't know. We'll see. George is, I already defeated George in the 2016 primary. I think he's been running for Congress almost continuously since 2007. He's yet to win an election or a primary. So we'll be interested to see. It's very hard to debate someone who has no record. He says he stands for a lot of things, but, he contradicts himself quite a bit. But we'll see. I mean, as it gets closer, right now we're social distancing and we're trying to get our word out. But I don't know. We'll see.
Well, yeah, I want to talk about that too, because based on fundraising numbers, you are outraising Mr. Phillips by a considerable margin. But the incumbent congressman has raised more than both of you combined. Do you think that's just because of his current position and the Democratic establishment supporting him, or does that kind of represent a lack of enthusiasm for a Republican representative in NY22?
I think that represents what's happening nationwide, and for decades, the Democrats always outraise the Republicans. I've always been outraised by Democrats in every race I've ever been in. I mean, Anthony Brindisi, between what he raised and what the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi and her super PAC, and George Soros and Mike Bloomberg and Tom Steyer, spent an unprecedented $15 million. From what I can account, it could be even more, on a race that just seemed inconceivable that anyone could raise that kind of money. I know Mark Weiner always gets it wrong in the Post Standard. Altogether, I think we had probably 7 or 8 million, which is a lot more than I've ever had. It's more than twice than I've ever had. But, it was a very, very close race, and the Democrats always outraised. They outraised the president when he defeated Hillary Clinton. Anthony Brindisi raised a fortune off impeaching the president. There's a lot of money to be made. It's a very, very lucrative business to impeach the president on the Democratic side. And so I don't think that's any surprise. Look at the kind of money Bernie Sanders raises and a number of them. But, Brindisi also has massive super PACs behind him. He's created his own super PAC where he can bypass his claim that he doesn't take money from corporate PACs. So he and Max Rose created their own little PAC where the corporate PACs, those evil corporations he always talks about, they can put their money into this PAC, and then that money gets funneled to Brindisi and Max Rose. What we do is very transparent and honest. I don't think just because somebody works for a big corporation, employee who might work for Bank of America or an employee who works at the Bank of Utica, I don't think that they should be treated differently. I think that both employees are entitled to their constitutional privileges and rights to make donations, to donate to their candidate of their choice. And somehow Mr. Brindisi seems to think that if you work for Bank of America, you're somehow evil versus someone who works at a small business. So I think all employees should be treated equally, regardless of their status or the company they work for. And so to me, it's a First Amendment right to make a donation to a campaign. So I think that, the game they play with vilifying corporations all the time, I own a corporation. My family business is incorporated. And, I don't think that just inherently makes us a bad group of people.
Sure. All right, I'm going to ask you a tough one now because I love to talk about my presidential politics. You always know that. So it's down to 2 candidates now, but it's pretty clear that Joe Biden's going to be the party's nominee against the man that you support is Donald Trump. But I want to ask objectively, if you could have chosen one of the 22 some odd Democratic candidates to be our next president, who would it have been and why? Out of all of them.
Before their campaign started, I would have chosen Tulsi Gabbard or Amy Klobuchar. But once they got on campaign mode, they turned all-out socialists, both of them, unfortunately. I'm disappointed that they towed the party line and got out early to endorse Joe Biden, which I didn't think they needed to do. I know both of them personally. I just thought it was disappointing that they decided that, I didn't think that either one of them were people that would support socialist policies. And I actually looked up Amy Klobuchar's record, much to my chagrin, found out she's just as left-wing as AOC, as is Anthony Brindisi. He's even more left-wing than AOC.
We asked him about that. Don't worry. We asked him about that last week.
And I'm talking about based on how they vote with the president's policies.
Yep.
So you can say, you can't look at like a state assembly voting record unless it's a specific vote,
right?
Because we vote on thousands of bills that are approving a lever voting machine, for example, in a local election or something.
Yeah.
We do all kinds of ministerial type of acts, which is different than Congress. So I like to look at that 538 rating, and I was so disappointed that because I think Amy Klobuchar seems like a common sense person. Of course, I like her. My good wishes go to her and her family. Her husband apparently has a coronavirus, which is very sad.
Yep.
And I hope he has a speedy recovery. I like Amy personally. I also like Tulsi Gabbard. I co-sponsored some bills with her. But I was surprised in the end that they really had to cater to this really left-wing socialist wing of the Democratic Party in order to gain any ground. And of course, neither of them, obviously Klobuchar went farther, but I don't know, those are the two I would have chosen out of the
That's
crew.
an interesting answer. Well, we I went out to New Hampshire and got a chance actually to interact with all of them. I got to ask Tulsi Gabbard a question at one of her town halls. So yeah, I've been able to interact with all of them. I think those are some two good choices. Now Joe
No,
Biden.
I like that Tulsi Gabbard, like in 2016, she bucked the Democratic establishment and didn't support Hillary Clinton, which I give her a lot of credit for. It took a lot of courage. And then Hillary went on to accuse her of being a Russian asset.
Yeah.
I mean, so Tulsi, Tulsi's, a talented person. She's, unfortunately, I just think that, I don't know why they have to take those policy positions, but I guess that's what you got to do in a national race.
Well, Joe Biden said he was going to pick a woman as his vice president, and Claudia, you are technically a woman, so happy April Fool's Day. You're going to be his vice president.
Picking any Republicans at this point, but yeah, so
we'll
Joe
see.
Biden again, so they claim he's a moderate, but he's grasped onto the Green New Deal. Now he says he's for Medicare for all. I mean, he's gone full Bernie on us, and his record, of course, doesn't reflect that in his past, but I do think that he may be past his prime. We'll see what
I know. Yeah, maybe they're going to draft Cuomo. He's your favorite.
Yeah, I don't know. Cuomo's got to deal with his own problems right now with the state budget. I think that his shine is going to start wearing off here as the budget becomes more disastrous for New Yorkers.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty, so I want to give you this time. We're going to wrap it up here. I want to give you this time to address the listeners about your message to them going forward.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Luke, and thank you for being a guest on my show. And to the listeners, I hope that everyone will have an open mind as we go into the election, and I hope that people recognize that we have a person that was in Congress that led the way on a number of issues, whether it was on health care, and I won a public health care award, as I said, took a lead on helping our veterans, our small businesses. Obviously, the veterans are near and dear to my heart. My son is still a captain in the Marine Corps, and my heart goes out to all of those people who have served, who are serving. Now we have first responders, hospital workers, postal workers. Everybody's out there now during this pandemic to try to keep what we have left of our economy going. So I think that people are looking for a leader, and I think I'm a leader for this time right now. I've shown my leadership. I stood out early against the Chinese Communist Party to warn us. When I first got elected, I was sworn into office when I wrote my first article on China that was published in 2016. Please tune to the follow-up article I did, was published in the Post-Standard on Sunday. But I just want to say thank you to everyone. I hope everyone is social distancing and complying with this. Let's put this virus out of our lives and minimize the death and illness that is being caused by it. And stay safe and wash your hands, please.
Thank you so much.